booze. Good morning, Internet. Wake up. It's almost booze o'clock. And you don't want to be late for booze o'clock. Hi, and welcome back to the Noisy Barstool Presents. I'm your host, traveling companion, and personal bartender, Dave, and today we'll be continuing our adventure in Denmark and then making our way to Sweden. Today's adventure starts by traveling to Amager Brewery. Amager is about a 20 to 30 minute drive outside the city center of Copenhagen, but it took us just over an hour by train and bus and finally walking through a neighborhood like a bunch of boozy nomads on a pilgrimage. But there was light at the end of this tunnel because we were greeted by this man here, Heinrich Popso, who, after we gave the customary gift of American bourbon to, gave us a tour of the facility. Amager has been in business since around 2007 and was at the forefront of the Danish craft beer movement. Today, the brewery resides in an old bomb shelter, giving it an architecturally squat and kind of monastic feeling. So if you think about it, we kind of were on a pilgrimage. While Amager makes great beer of all kinds, they're probably best known for their bigger, bolder beers. Things with a high ABV or a rich, sweet, malty characteristic. Their Herr Fredriksen is an example of a world-class stout that clocks in around 10.5%. So if you find it, it's definitely worth it, but be careful, it sneaks up on you. They also are known for doing a lot of collaborations and have worked with Jester King, Bibliothek, Against the Grain, Arizona Wilderness, Three Floyds, Brewski, Mikler, Prairie, Evil Twin. The list goes on. Amager got in a little hot water in 2017 with its neighbors in Sweden when the brewery released a series of beers patterned after the 7 Deadly Sins. Sweden censored the bottle associated with lust for its saucy description and its illustration of a semi-nude woman. Their reasoning was that Sweden didn't want any material that promoted the idea that sexual success could be equated with drinking beer. Which, if we're being honest with ourselves, isn't a bad idea. I actually have one of the uncensored bottles right here, and while I'm sympathetic to Swedish law, that's not the worst thing I've ever seen printed on a bottle. And after going back and forth for a little while, the brewery just decided to put a black oval where the picture would be, and after that, it was sold in Sweden. Amager has also been censored in the US for their beer Psychedelic Popcorn, which they had to change to Psychotronic Popcorn in order to get past US censors. Heinrich tells us that the way that they chose the new name was simply by opening the dictionary and choosing at random a cool-looking word that was on the same page. So yes, the folk at Amager truly are the Danish bad boys of naming conventions. And they take their name seriously. A lot of their beers are named after fictional characters with full backstories. Some of these characters, like Christopher the Crimson Crooner or Linda the Axe Grinder, have more written about them than some Silver Age comic book characters.
So I came back to the artist, the 18-year-old Simon, and said, what's going on? And he had honestly no idea, really. So he constructed this story about a futuristic terrorist or something like that. And I said, that's definitely not going to be any good to tell.
After finishing up at Amager, it was time to leave Denmark, so we made our way to the train station. Our final destination that night was going to be Gothenburg, where we'd spend the night. But before that, we were going to stop at Brekeriet and Brewski, so it was going to be a marathon. Our first stop was in Landskrona. Landskrona. Somebody who speaks the language, please help me out in the comments. For Brekeriet, a brewery that opened in 2012 just outside of Malmö. Brekeriet's claim to fame is that they're the only brewery in Sweden to use all wild yeast and bacteria to ferment their beers. Now, to understand what that means, we have to talk a little bit about yeast and bacteria and what it does to beer generally. See, beer, in its simplest form, is made up of very few ingredients: water, grain, yeast, and hops. And yeast takes sugars, like those found in grain, and converts them into alcohol. Whereas bacteria, at least in beer, takes sugars and converts them into acid. But Dave, what happened? Normally I just come to your channel to crack a beer and hang out. I didn't think I was actually going to learn anything. Yeah, sorry, I guess. Originally, all beer was wild beer. That means the yeast and the bacteria occurring in the beer came from the environment in which the beer was being made. Out of the air, out of the container, off the grain itself. And as you can imagine, wild beers can be a bit unpredictable. Today, those yeast strains and those various bacteria have been isolated. So the term wild doesn't mean only open air fermentation. Rather, it stands in contrast to single culture fermentation. So when you see the term wild beer, it means that more than one yeast strain or bacteria are used in the making of beer. This more accurately represents what it would be like for open air fermentation, but it certainly is more controlled. And by adding the bacteria, a lot of times you get sour or funky notes. So Brekeriet's beers often have this delightful sour note to them. The beers made by Brekeriet are complex and multifaceted and delightful. And if you're a wine drinker who's looking to break into craft beer, this would be a good brewery to start with, especially if you can pick up their Brekeriet Raz, which is their Raspberry Berliner Weiss, or the Brekeriet Cassis, which is their Blackcurrant Saison. From there, we were supposed to head back to the train and get on our way to Brewski, but it started raining pretty hard. Like, not New Orleans hard. But still pretty hard. So our friends at Brewski actually offered to pick us up. It was the first time I had seen a Tesla. Weird. It's like a MacBook on wheels. Brewski was opened in 2014 and is probably best known for its sours and its IPAs. And it's also an urban farm because it grows some of the ingredients that they use in the beers themselves. It's literally got hops growing up the wall. It's pretty cool. Brewski's all about striking out in new directions. One of their core tenets is just because a type of beer hasn't been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. And when their neighbors were making sweeter, maltier beers, they were making bitter West Coast IPA style beers like the Passion Faber. Even now, Brewski takes established convention and turns it on its ear. For instance, they take coffee, a flavor normally associated with stouts, porters, brown ales, and puts it in their Berliner Weiss, a pale sour ale. Or in their collaboration with Against the Grain, Against the Grape, they use wine grapes in their beer. Ultimately, Brewski goes its own way, and I for one thank them. For those of us who have had every crisp lager or every new IPA on the market, it's kind of nice to see a brewery who's doing something purposefully different. As the saying goes, Brewski doesn't do beer. Beer does Brewski. After having one more with Brewski, we left and made our way back to the train station. It was time to go to Gothenburg. But that's a story for a different day. For now, I think it's time to sign off. I've been your host, your traveling companion, and your personal bartender, Dave, and I invite you to join me next time when we'll continue our travels in Sweden. If you liked this episode enough to want to see the next one, I invite you to like the episode, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell icon thing to keep updated. And as always, if it ever looks like your glass is half empty, maybe that means you're just not drinking fast enough. Cheers.